Good afternoon. I'm going to call to order this quarterly board work session of the Richland 1 Board of Commissioners. It is February 11th, 2025 at 2:00 p.m. We are at the Stevenson Administration Building located at 1616 Richland Street, Columbia, South Carolina. And pursuant to the Freedom of Information Act, all persons, organizations, and media outlets, as requested, have been notified of the time, date, place, and agenda of this meeting. We do have a public agenda and portion of this meeting, which will begin at 3 p.m. But before we get to that, we do have an executive session agenda. Do I have a motion regarding the executive session agenda?
Move for approval, Chair.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Bishop, seconded by Commissioner Clyburn. Any discussion or questions? All right, I'll call for the vote manually. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, say no. All right, the ayes have it. It was a 5-0 vote. We are currently missing Commissioners Weston and Devine. So we will go into executive session. We have one item on the executive session agenda, and that is 2.01, a discussion regarding the cyber security plan. Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm going to call to order the public session of this quarterly board work session of the Richland County School District 1 Board of Commissioners. It's Tuesday, February 11th, 2025, and it is 3 o'clock. We are located at the Stevenson Administration Building, 1616 Richland Street, Columbia, South Carolina. Pursuant to the Freedom of Information Act, all persons, organizations, and media outlets, as requested, have been notified of the time, date, place, and agenda of this meeting. Before we get to the agenda adoption, I do want to note that we did go into executive session, and we exit executive session on a motion by Commissioner Weston that was seconded by Commissioner Clyburn. It was a unanimous 6-0 vote of the members who were present, and we exited at 2:42 p.m. We now have an agenda before us. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chair, move that we approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
So we've got a motion by Commissioner Devine, seconded by Commissioner Weston to approve the agenda. Any discussion or questions? All right, I'll call for the vote, and we'll do that manually. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. This is 7-0 unanimous vote, so that motion carries. We will then go to the first item on the agenda under the Office of Operations, which is 5.01, Cybersecurity Plan.
Good afternoon, Chairman Lomanek, Board of Commissioners, Dr. Witherspoon. In the executive session, we discussed the cybersecurity plan. For information, are there any questions?
I see or hear no questions. Thank you very much, Dr. Kopik.
Thank you.
All right, we will move on to 5.02, Capital Construction Projects Overview.
Good evening, Chair Lomanak, Board of Commissioners, Dr. Witherspoon. Thank you for an opportunity to provide you all with a capital projects overview. Before we get started, capital projects do reside in multiple departments besides operations. There are some that reside in finance and motor pool, but the vast majority of them do reside in the operations department, and my team is here to be able to answer questions on the back end as needed. Would also like to, just a general reminder, our strategic plans core priority number 5 is that we provide and maintain high-quality facilities, technology, and resources to support efficiencies and innovation, and that is the heart of what we do with our operations program and our capital projects. So we're going to talk through just a few items. You can see just a rough idea of the agenda there. Capital projects are investments in construction, renovation, purchase, replacement, and improvement of physical assets. And assets are a variety of items such as computers, buses, weapons detectors, cameras, HVAC units, and of course, the largest capital asset, which is our buildings and facilities. Sometimes it's easier to think about what capital projects are not. Capital projects are not supplies. They're not computer programs, uniforms, consumable items. They're the big things that are expected to last for a long time and to serve our district. Capital projects are generally funded through one of two methods, through our general obligation bond sales. You often hear those referred to as our 8% money, and those bond sales take place in the springtime. We can also fund them through transfers from the general fund, and we have done that historically at the end of the audits that conclude in December. There are funds that remain that are able to be transferred over to our capital projects to allow us to do some projects that we may not have normally been able to do. Of course, any of those transfers from the general fund to the capital fund must be approved by the Board of Commissioners. The other source I'm not going to talk about much, of course, is special obligation bonds, things like bond referendums that would be for very, very large projects, but that is another source of funding for capital projects. So how do we categorize our projects in Richland 1? We talk about projects really as two different types. There are recurring projects, which are ongoing or replacement cycle projects. An example of a recurring project are things like replacing our student laptops that have to be done on an annual basis, athletic equipment, things like fixing, replacing, repairing fences, ceiling tiles, auditorium seats, cameras in our facilities and our buses, replacing playgrounds, replacing vehicles and buses, and replacing different mechanical units. Those are all of our recurring projects, and you'll see those showing up on our capital project list annually, and you'll see the same ones every year because we have to replace things on an annual basis. We also have one-time capital projects, and a number of examples I could have put that are one-time projects, like the Lower Richland softball press box, site improvements that we do, all of our Schneider projects with energy performance. Those are one-time projects. Parking lots, doing different projects that are identified around the district, and the way that those are identified is we have a very good team. And they survey our facilities. They know what is going on. They work with all of the folks within the facilities on a daily basis. Recommendations are made for projects, as well as the team works with outside vendors. Currently, we're going through our facility condition assessment. They began on site last week, and out of that facility condition assessment, we will get a list of projects and things that need to be addressed. And some of those will be one-time, and some of those will be recurring or ongoing projects. So those are the basic types of projects that we have in Richland School District 1. So will those two types of capital projects look similar? They will. For instance, we have roofing projects. We have a roofing program for recurring projects, which is to go in and replace small areas, to do repairs where there may be some issues, and we do that on an ongoing basis. You'll also see one-time projects. For instance, we're doing CSF over the warehouse, replacing that roof. That's a one-time project. So you see both of those showing up on the project list. We're also working right now to identify, we've got a school that has a specific section of that school that roof needs to be replaced. We're working through getting all of the costs for that, and then we'll see where we can fund that from, whether it's through a one-time project now, or is that something we need to look at with a transfer after the fund balance is all set up. Another example might be HVAC. So we have an ongoing, a recurring program to replace our failing mechanical units, which generally are HVACs, but they can be a lot of other units that may need to be replaced. So we do that on an annual basis, and that's one of the largest recurring projects that we ask for annually. I think last year it was maybe $850,000 to $1 million, and those are replacing, repairing units and then replacing individual units. But then we may also put in a one-time project like we have for Forest Heights, where we're going to replace the entirety of their HVAC system. And so then that would be an example of a one-time. But they look similar in that they're both listed in there, but the mechanical, replacing the mechanical units is just going to be various district-wide. At the beginning of the year when we submit the request for that, we may have 4, 5, 10 units that we know we need to replace those. But then we may not know about a lot of them that come up when students come back in August or in the wintertime when things switch over, that we find out we've got to replace a unit. So that's why we asked for that large amount of money to replace those units. So when we talk about a capital project budget, what happens on a one-time project if it's over or under the budget? Well, if it's over budget, meaning costs exceed what we initially had projected them to cost, we'll come back and we'll go through that procurement process. You're allowed to do change orders up to $50,000, and we may need to do that. Or we may come back and say, this project is it's significantly more because the scope has increased, and we'll come back and we'll make a request for an additional project. We generally use unallocated capital project dollars to do that. And those unallocated dollars come from projects that came under budget. So as an example of that, if you remember last spring, it was approved for a little over $1 million for marquees to be replaced throughout the district. Well, we based our budget on what we had been spending on individual marquees, which was right around $50,000 to replace an individual one. Well, once we got all of those projects together and were able to put that out for a solicitation, the vendors came back with a much reduced cost for us, and so that meant that we had additional funds that we weren't going to need for the marquee project, and that was helpful because we had an unexpected project, which leads me to number 2, projects coming in under budget. We return those funds to an unallocated budget. So this year, Satchel Ford had some drainage issues that we're having to address, and those costs were pretty significant. But we were able to use funds from projects that had come in under budget and kind of put those together in order to work through getting everything that needs to be done for the drainage upgrades at Satchel Ford. Another project that has come in that would be one that would be over is the W.G. Sanders Auditorium. The initial scope of the project was just for the HVAC. It has grown to be able to include things like ADA compliance, fire alarm systems, painting, and some other things that need to be done. So we'll need additional funds for that. We may have a little bit based on our unallocated dollars, but we're also going to be coming back and asking specifically for some money in order to be able to get the next stages of that project done. So what happens if a recurring project is coming in over or under budget? Well, the good news is that never happens. So a recurring project is something that we're going to be doing annually, and so we just reduce the scope of what we're able to do. So, for instance, if we're painting some facilities and it comes in, the bid comes in higher than what we have money for, then we just reduce the scope to meet the money that we have. Another recurring project that we use is auditorium seating replacement. So when you look in our capital project list, you might see that listed 4 times from 2021, 22, 23, 24. Well, when we started, we decided to replace one auditorium, and maybe there was $100,000 for that project, and the initial project came in at $80,000, so we have $20,000 remaining. Well, we don't have enough to do another school at that point. So we have to wait until the next year to have additional funds in order to be able to handle that school. And sometimes larger auditoriums may come in where we have to wait 2 years until we have 2 years worth of project funds in order to be able to do that. So recurring projects don't come in over or under budget. The scope is just reduced to meet the need, or sometimes the scope is increased. If we have a bid for doing fencing at a school, then we may be able to replace a few more schools with issues, or playgrounds. Playgrounds are very expensive now, but if it comes in that a school's under budget, then we may be able to hit a second school during that same time period. So the next 2 slides are the reports that you all see on a monthly basis that are part of the monthly financial report. So the first report that you're seeing is basically just a listing of all of the projects, and they're numerically listed by the fund code where those projects came from, meaning what year that they were approved, with which GO bond dollars that they were approved. And you're going to see the first number is just that the project code, and that's so we know how to categorize those projects. Then you'll see a brief description of that project, and then you'll see who it is that's responsible. So it may be, I may be responsible for it, Mr. Henry, Dr. Kopix, different folks are responsible based on what the project is for. And then you'll see the approval date, and that's the date that the board approved that project. And if you remember, capital projects generally come to you with those GO bonds one time with a big, huge list of projects that we're going to do with those funds. And then you'll see what the starting budget is, and then you'll see any encumbrances in whatever remaining budget. So when you look at this list, you see things all over the place. You see some projects that are almost nearing completion. You'll see some projects that don't have any funds expended, but you'll see that the funds are encumbered, meaning they're encumbered to the PO, the vendor's ready to go, and then they're working on getting the work. And then you'll see some projects where no funds have been encumbered and nothing's been spent, but we're getting to it. And it may be a recurring project that we're waiting for some additional funds the next year so that we can work through. So that's one of the reports that you see in that monthly financial report. On the next page, you see what is the closed and open projects. So this is the one that you can see what has been closed or open. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to read the description that finance puts in there for us to tell you whether it was closed or open. And then you can look at the specific project and you can see what the budget was. And then you can see what expenses or encumbrances are part of that project. And we're not going to close a project if there's any money encumbered on it. So basically it's going to be expenses charged to that, and then if there's any balance left over. So earlier I referred to if there's a project that we close out, that we finish, and there's some monies left over, we'll move that into an unallocated account, and then later we'll use those unallocated funds as needed for other projects. So in what you have here, the first example, you see the scholarship ID system. The budget for that was $507,000. You see that the expenditures for that were very, very low compared to the amount that was there. Well, that's because they were able to get, excuse me, I said five, it's 307,000. That we were able to get everything done for a lot less. So there were some unexpended funds that we were able to move to an unallocated account. Just below that, you see the VNX replacement, and you see how close the project budget was compared to the expenditures on that. And so we like to see that. You like to see that your estimates at the beginning and everything that you've been provided from your vendors is very close to what was spent. So just a little bit of money was remaining when we closed that out. Going down, you see a couple of more projects, which is a bus replacement and fire panel replacement. Those are examples of recurring projects. So once those funds were all expended, you see that there was nothing left. We closed those projects out. The same with the third set of numbers, which is freeze preparedness for freezing weather or vehicle replacements. All of those funds were expended, and those are recurring projects. Once those funds are expended, we close that project out, and you may see a similar, you're going to see vehicle projects multiple times on there because there may be one from 22, 23, 24. They might have a real small amount, and at some point we'll get to where we'll buy a vehicle from 3 different projects. So we'll say, okay, we've got this $50,000 truck to buy. We're going to buy, $5,000 is left on this project. We'll use that. $7,000 from this project, and then the remainder from the current project. And so those are the 2 main reports that that you'll see every month with the monthly financial report. So kind of an update and an overview on all of our projects. The current number of projects that we have right now in those reports that you see is 261, and actually that number is now incorrect because as of this morning we closed another one. Hopefully as of later tonight we'll be opening some additional projects. So there are about 50-50 on the recurring and the one-time projects. The projects certainly change daily, weekly, monthly, the number of projects that we have. The recurring projects, again, as a reminder, you'll see the same ones over and over because we're continually doing vehicle replacements. We're continually replacing laptops. We're replacing vehicles, painting, and doing those projects. The one-time projects, one thing that I will tell you is you may see the same looking project in multiple times. And what that means is, so an example of that, like W.G. Sanders Auditorium, you're going to see a couple of projects related to that because the scope started as just the HVAC, and now that it's expanding, there'll be additional projects to cover the additional work. You'll see Schneider projects in there a bunch. We closed out a lot from phase 1 last month, and we're getting ready to be able to close out some additional projects from some of the other phases. But you'll see 15 to 20 Schneider projects because there's one for each school location. Another example, Carver Lion had an expansion a couple of years ago. I think there were 5 or 6 projects related to finishing that project and the actual project itself. Once we are certain that all of those costs are expended, that we have no more additional money will need to be spent on that project, we'll close out the remainder of those projects. And again, there were like 5 of those, I think, when I was looking through that list. So that is a general overview of our capital budgets, our projects, and at this time, I'm certainly glad to answer any questions. My folks are here if there are specific questions related to an area that they might be able to answer. And we also know that we're not going to have all the answers right now, so we recognize that if we have to get back with you, we'll take down questions and get answers back.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Commissioner Moore?
At one point, we talked about the feasibility of maybe having a list of projects by facility or by site. Is that something that is possible and that we could consider working on? You know, like list Brennan Elementary, and here are the things that are going on
I
there.
know they're looking at that, but
Okay.
just as he said, the projects can
Right.
change.
Right, I understand
Depending
that.
on what's happening real time, roof goes out and at another site,
Right.
then, okay, something might get put on hold, we gotta do the roof and all of that. So that is something they're looking at.
Okay.
But I wouldn't necessarily just, we know how construction goes and things can happen. I wouldn't want anybody to come and say, oh, that was supposed to be number 3.
No.
And
Well, and I
but
wouldn't
that is
necessarily-
something we're,
Yeah.
they're evaluating that, and we'll
Okay.
certainly be providing
Okay,
something.
not necessarily in an order, but just these are the
Yeah.
projects at a facility. Thank you.
Commissioner Hersey?
Thank you, Mr. Grant, for the information. Can you elaborate just a little so that I better understand the facility assessment project? Is there a local team doing it? Is it district employees? And what does that look like?
So the facility condition assessment is being done by MGT Parsons, who is the same group that actually did the 2017 facility condition assessment. We put that out for bid, and they won the solicitation. And so their headquarters, I believe, Texas is where I think they're headquartered out of. So their team they fly in and they're doing the assessment. They are working with Al Nelson, who is our energy manager, is the manager of this project. And so he's working with those teams as they go out, and they will be on site for the next, over the course, I think, of the next 6 weeks at each location. And then there's a plan for them to come back and do an additional part of the assessment where they are doing more conversation with staff in each building. This one is conditions of the physical building itself.
So when you say, so are they going to all school sites as well as district buildings, or are you giving them pre-identified locations?
Everything we own,
everything.
yes, every building, district, or school site.
Okay. Okay.
Commissioner Wesson?
Thank you, Mr. Grant. The recurring projects, I just noted ceiling tiles. Once that has been done, is there anything that you do to, you call back for the same ceiling tiles to check what's causing the problem and fix that issue? If so, where does it lie?
Yeah, certainly, so that would be under the roofing project, the recurring monies that we put in there. If there's a leak in a ceiling, generally it's going to be one of 2 issues, which is going to be an HVAC issue, that it's leaking somewhere, or the roof is leaking. And so if they have to come back more than once, then they will alert the other crafts. as far as whether it's our roofing or whether it's our HVAC, to go in and start doing a little bit more investigating to see what the issue is.
Okay. Looking at your, you had Metafield parking lot as an example. Is that completed? It was a one-time project, and you have it listed there, so I was just asking, is it completed?
No, it is a one-time project, and final costs exceed the amount of the project, of the funding available, and so there's going to have to be additional funds placed with an additional project in order to complete everything that needs to be done. I know that the team has been working, and I think there's been a little bit of hang-up with SCDOT and where the driveway is and whether or not it can be closed off, or whether we can have two driveways that are, if you're familiar with it, the additional parking lot, the gravel one, is very close to the correct driveway, and DOT does not want that to happen. So we're having to work with engineers to see if that drive can be moved a little bit further down and be far enough away from the current standard driveway that is used, that half circle in the front.
Okay. Is there any idea when it will be completed or addressed further?
Well, it's currently being addressed. I don't have a completion date, but it is being addressed with the engineers and with DOT.
Commissioner Hersey.
One more, with the Snyder project, I know the overall premise behind that was to help save the district money. But when I look back through some of the bank statements, I see a lot where we're paying Snyder. Can you explain that just so I understand? You know, what's involved with us receiving reimbursements back from Snyder, as well as us having to pay Snyder for certain things?
I can answer part of that. The rest of it is, it's a very, very long answer, and I don't have all of the information in front of me. So the Schneider projects are in multiple phases. So phases 1 and 3 are phases 1 and 4 are lease purchase programs where we set it up through Bank of America that we are over 20 years paying for the equipment, and then the payments, though, are made through the generated savings. Phase 2 was the solar panels. That was also created the same way, where it's a lease purchase. Over 20 years, the money you save from generating your own electricity is what you use to offset paying for the equipment, the solar panels. Phase 3, we are using capital funding, and that is, we put in a capital project 3 years ago for $5 million. Last year, or the current year, we're in for $5.9 million, and then we'll be asking for the final $5 million with our next set of capital projects. And that is, it's not a lease. We're purchasing all of that equipment outright, all of the lighting, all of the things that they're doing, and it will generate savings for the district. They're only giving us money back if we don't generate enough savings based on what they predicted. The 5th phase is the Forest Heights HVAC replacement, and that will be not a lease. Again, we're just going to outlay the money to pay for all of the replacement of the equipment, and then it will generate savings for us on the back end based on having, I think it was 43 sets of units that were being replaced. Don't quote me on the number, but it's, so when we're paying, when you see payments going out, those payments are going to Bank of America, are being released through Bank of America for phases 1, 2, and 4. And then phase 3, which is what we're paying for, is a capital project. So again, it's very complicated because we've used multiple funding mechanisms for this.
So with the company that's doing the facilities assessment, I'm assuming that they would take all of that into consideration when making their recommendations.
Correct. And so what actually Schneider is working and has a database of everything that they've replaced, and they are providing that to Parsons, which actually ends up saving them a good deal of time of not having to go look at HVAC units that are brand new. So they know by facility what's brand new, what's been replaced, transformers, lighting, all of the things, any of the building envelope that has been redone as well. They know they'll have all of that information without having to go and lay eyes and touch it, because they'll have it in an electronic database.
Thank you.
Commissioner Weston.
When will we start seeing some savings per se, with Snyder?
Currently. So it's current. We actually just finished our one-year meeting for phase one, phase two, because phase two was completed prior to phase one because it was just the solar panels. And they generated the information for us, and they guaranteed, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but they exceeded the guarantee of savings. So we're selling back energy to Dominion already, and then our bills are basically non-existent because we're generating the electricity already, or the power.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Grant, I've just got one question. When funds are unallocated, they can be used for capital projects only, right? Is that the difference between unallocated and unassigned?
Yes, I'll let Ms. Matthews Hazel.
Mr. Lomanek, they can be unassigned, means it's available to be used for one-time type transactions. It could be capital projects, summer school, you've seen summer school come through, things of that nature.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Do you have more to add to that?
Just the unallocated, once they're in capital projects, are just for
Capital
for
projects.
capital projects.
Right.
Is the
Okay.
other half.
Yeah,
That's
we
what I
don't
thought.
Move it out of capital projects for
Right.
something else.
Right.
And
Okay.
what we typically do is we've brought to the board recommendations for things to go into capital projects. And that's what, over the last couple of meetings, we've asked the board to approve some one-time transfers into various capital projects. But
Right.
once they're in capital projects, they stay in capital projects.
Right, okay. Thank you for that clarification. Commissioner Weston?
You noted that W.G. Sanders Auditorium, once you started there with HVAC, you found other things that were needed. You have to make it ADA compliant. Does it need to continue to be repaired, or would it be cheaper to start over? Okay,
Repair.
Yeah, yes.
okay. I just hadn't seen the numbers, and
Sure.
so when you run into several different things, you
Well,
may
you're gonna have
see-
demolition, you're gonna have, and then even with some of these repairs, and you all can speak to this more than I can, depending on what's done, their new codes, that's what you sometimes run into. But in the case of this one, it's not that the auditorium is a total loss, so to speak. It just, nothing has been done there in a while. So if we started with a certain piece, then as they've looked, okay, there's more that needs to be done.
Is it possible to list them side by side and weigh the options of repair, replace?
Well, we've spent a number of dollars, but that's something we can look at.
Thank you.
Commissioner Devine?
Thank you. So, going back to Parsons, do we have a date on when we have the facility upgrade report?
So they'll have some general information by the fall in 6 months. What they have to do going through the schools the second time, where they're going to be meeting with principals to talk about usage and to help with some of the real specific information, that will be generated later during their second visits, which I believe those are scheduled in the fall, but I will get a firm answer on when that second visit is.
All right, and then typically, once we close out these projects, you look at 6 months, a year in advance to close those out, or do we keep those open before we close them out? How long do we keep those open before we close them out?
We've had some staffing turnover, and so some things have stayed open longer than they need to be open. So typically, 6 months after a construction project is over, you should know all of your final costs.
Right.
But we do have some things that have been open longer, and so it is making sure that new staff that have come aboard that have been assigned those projects have had the opportunity to make sure and vet everything is completed fully, and that we aren't going to need to spend additional funds on that.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I don't see any more questions. Thank you, Mr. Grant. I appreciate the presentation. And with that, we'll move to the Office of the Board, 6.01 Internal Audit Overview from Mr. Washington.
Good afternoon, Chairman. This is afternoon, yes. Chairman Lomanek, Commissioners, Dr. Witherspoon. I appreciate this opportunity to bring forth some information regarding the internal audit process and to also address the many questions that have come to me regarding that process and some other items as well. What I have is copies or hard copies, if you will, of the presentation. I think most of you have it on your laptop, if I'm not mistaken. If anybody needs a hard copy, I have some right here.
Is this a whole packet?
That's the whole thing.
Anybody else?
Need some more. You good? We'll take.
How many more you got?
That's it.
We're good. Yeah.
I didn't want to burn too many trees, but
Mr. Chairman, before you start, is this what we received in the mail also?
yes.
No. Hold on. So this is what we received in the
In the
email,
email.
not the mail.
No. Okay, because I got the mail yesterday.
So there should be an email from Mr. Washington with this attachment.
Correct. I couldn't pull that down,
Gotcha.
so I assume it was the same thing.
That's
So it's
what this
different.
is. This is the email, but not the mail. I do want to say, and I should have said this at the outset, the presentation today, for purposes of the work session, Mr. Washington's going to go through the internal audit kind of overview processes. This is not going to be a presentation or questions about any ongoing or individual specific investigations. And so that email attachment that everyone got will have the same presentation and information he's going to give today.
That's good. Thank you. Thank you.
Right, and as background, that I compiled that into a booklet form so that you can use the source document going forward. And you can actually look at it on a continuous basis if need be and come back with questions at a later time if necessary. If you don't mind following with me on the first page, the table of contents, I'm going to outline some of the topics that we're going to cover. And again, even though your packet has 9 pages in it and about 40 pages of exhibits, I'm only going to briefly cover the topics that are part of the main presentation and not the exhibits. So again, in the table of contents you have, as the first item, the internal audit process. Second item is definition and purpose of internal controls. Third is overview of operation concerns, the effectiveness of internal controls, the strategic plan and internal controls. That's going to briefly talk about how controls operational matters correlate directly with what I call the left side of the organization chart versus the right side of the organization chart. The next item is the role of the audit committee / board and the administration. There's a slash there because there's still some uncertainty, if you will, regarding an audit committee. The next item is what is risk. Internal control framework is after that. And then I will address some of the relative questions that have been presented to me over the last year or so. And as you see at the bottom, it lists all the exhibits that are part of your packet. I will not discuss those in detail today, but I'm sure you will generate some questions once you review that packet at some other point. Item number 1, internal audit. Now, board policy BDHA, which is Exhibit A for reference, established the internal audit function here in 2000, September 2000. That process is to help promote and evaluate the efficiency and effectiveness of internal controls surrounding all programs, departments, activities, functions, et cetera. That policy, by the way, was revised in 2021, I'm sorry. And at any point in time, there's a question, feel free to interrupt me. I don't have to go through the whole document. If a question surfaces after each topic, feel free to ask me at that time. The second topic is the definition and purpose of internal controls. Now, this is what any organization that strives to achieve its objectives should keep in mind at all times. And I'll address each of those bullets. The first one is compliance with policies, procedures, plans, laws, rules, and regulations. So as you carry out or carry forth your particular business, whatever as an end user, what it is that you do in any organization, you want to be mindful of complying with all policies and procedures. By the same token, you want to make sure that you have reliable and accurate and timely reporting of operational and financial information. You want to be efficient, effective, and economical with how you use your resources, whether it's state, private, federal. Just be mindful of what every government entity should do, and that is to be economical with how you deploy your resources. And last is safeguarding your assets, keeping them free from fraud, waste, abuse, or mismanagement, errors, et cetera. So that is the control outline that any entity should strive to achieve. Now, there are some common myths with regards to internal control. I want to address a couple of those. Oftentimes, people think that it's just having a strong set of policies and procedures. That's not necessarily true. Well, actually, that is true. But more importantly, is having a strong, what we call a strong controlled environment. That's the culture, if you will, of any organization. You want to make sure that that's in place and that it is a strong environment. And we can address that a little bit later. Any questions for the next topic? Yes, sir.
No questions. Yeah, yeah, just, let's go through the whole thing, because it'll be hard to coordinate questions by section.
Okay, section 3 is the overview of operational concerns. And this is just an observation. And in 16, going on 17 years here, with some of the audits that we've done, it's pretty clear that with more emphasis, if you will, on having strong internal controls, some of the issues identified wouldn't have occurred. So that's just, again, an observation from all the audits that I've done. And if you look at Exhibit G, by the way, it shows you, what provides you the entire database of everything that the Internal Audit Department has done since my beginning of my tenure here, so through 2024. Now, there are some, not necessarily here at this district, but throughout a lot of school districts who believe that a school district is not a business. And I just want to say that it's universally accepted that it is a business to a certain extent, and I'll leave it at that. So I'll address any questions that you may have on that one. I think there will be questions about that later. The fourth part is the strategic plan and internal controls. And I mentioned briefly during when I introduced the table of contents that what I've observed in the 16 years here is that we have an organization chart that reflects what I call the left side and the right side. And the strategic plan rightfully addresses academia, everything on the left side. There's no question about that from an audit standpoint. What I would like to say as an auditor, and having been here for a long time, is to have even more emphasis on the right side to be addressed in some fashion in the strategic plan. By that I mean there's a direct correlation between operations and infrastructure, i.e. the right side, with the left side. Without the right side, you're not going to have good. You're not going to have a good left side, to be frank. Again, I will not go into details on that. I just want to introduce that as a thought and observation over the last 17 years. Item number 5, internal controls, the role of the board and the audit committee. Now, the purpose, the function, responsibility, and authority of the board is detailed in the audit committee charter, and that's Exhibit B. So each section will have an exhibit that you can refer to. And that exhibit supports board policy BDHA. Keep in mind that BDHA still refers to policy BDEA that's no longer in place. BDEA established an audit committee. That committee was vacated a few years back, but the current policy BDHA still refers to an audit committee, the internal audit department, et cetera. So at some point, we may need to get some clarity on that and speak to whether or not there's going to be an audit committee going forward. If not, we probably need to address policy BDHA. Just going to move forward to item 7. This is the internal control framework. These are some things that are not necessarily tangible, but some items that we need to be mindful of as we continue to operate and continues to strive for continuous improvement, if you will. Now, there are 5 components of the framework, and I'll try to go through all 5 as quickly as I can, but let me put some emphasis on the first one, which is the controlled environment or the culture that we spoke to. I'm going to read that first paragraph that you're looking at verbatim, because that's how important it is. The controlled environment, or culture, as you may want to call it, is the foundation and the most important component of the control framework. The board and the administration established the tone at the top regarding the importance of internal controls and expected standards of conduct. Some of the essential elements for establishing and maintaining a strong control environment or positive culture include those items that are bulleted after that. I won't read all those bullets, but let me just point to one in particular, which is the first one, is the strongest control element you can have is to make certain that you hire the right people and that we minimize nepotism as much as we can. So when you look at some of the concerns that have been addressed in some of these audit reports over the years, if you start to go back to identify the root cause and you roll back to the beginning, you'll see that maybe that particular person shouldn't have been managing that process, managing those resources in the beginning. So just want to make sure we emphasize that. And the final point on control environment is the control environment is greatly influenced by the extent to which individuals recognize that they will be held accountable. So accountability is extremely important in having strong controls in any organization, school district or any entity for that matter. Some of the other 4 elements are self-explanatory. I won't spend time on those, but I will address any question if you have some at the end. But we'll bypass those particular bullet points and move forward to the relative questions that have been asked of internal audit over the last couple of years. The first one is, how does the internal audit committee, how does the internal auditor communicate importance of the internal controls? The importance of controls are always addressed in every audit report that we produce. Secondly, we used to give workshops on internal controls. Now, I hadn't done one of those in quite a while, but I'm open to going back to doing those things as well. Second question. How is the internal audit, the external auditor different from the internal auditor? The primary mission of the external audit firm is to attest to the accuracy of the financial statements. That's the careful audit that we see at the end of every year. So that's the primary function of the external audit firm. Internal audit scope is more comprehensive and continuous. It serves the district by helping the district accomplish its objectives and to improve operations. So the internal auditor is always here, working for the district. The external auditor comes in at the end of the year to assess the financial statements. The next question brought to me was, does fraud exist in the district? I can tell you for certainty that in recent years, there's been no indicators that have come to my attention in any audits. But you will see before you the fraud, what we call the fraud triangle. And there's a reason that is embedded in the quarterly update that's sent to you all every quarter. Because it's important that we establish or that we recognize what that fraud triangle means. Most perpetrators of fraud do so because they have pressure. If you can visualize those in the audience, a triangle, and you're going to have pressure, rationalization, and opportunity. Well, there's not much that we can do as an organization about those who feel the pressure to commit fraud. Pressure because they have gambling debts or there's a sense of greed, or when they rationalize committing fraud. The district has plenty of money, they won't miss us. People in the district are not honest, so why should I be? That's how they rationalize, and they tend to commit fraudulent acts. But one thing we can control is the opportunity. So by having strong controls, we can either reduce or minimize the opportunity that a perpetrator may have in committing those fraudulent activities. Third question. Does the district need a compliance and ethics hotline? I put forth this question because it was asked of me, but I actually don't have an answer because that is a responsibility or decision that the board has to make and not mine necessarily. Richland County School District 1's compliance and ethics hotline was adopted in February of fiscal year 2015. Now, the Internal Audit Department was designated as the coordinator and established a framework and a procedures manual to carry out that function. The purpose is pretty clear. It is to establish an anonymous and confidential mechanism for reporting suspected fraud, waste, abuse, and any significant procedural violations without fear of retaliation. So that was established again in FY 2015. As to the specific question asked of me, if pressed, I will give my opinion. But again, that is something that the board has to decide. How does internal audit determine what gets audited? Now, the framework, and I'm going to read this verbatim because I think it's important to know that there have been a lot of questions about, well, why is this being audited? Why is that being audited? The framework for determining what gets audited was developed primarily via a risk assessment process that was established in 2015. And that's Exhibit D, by the way, if you want to refer to it. On a continual basis, internal audit assesses risk and exposure in operation areas and ranks them via a risk ranking matrix. That's Exhibit E, if you want to refer to it. Now, based on this risk-based process, the annual audit plan is developed. That's Exhibit F, if you want to refer to it. Now, as detailed in Exhibit F, the annual audit plan, there are other factors that come into play when it comes to developing all the items, auditable activities for the audit plan in that year. But primarily, it's based on a risk assessment process that was developed in 2015. Recent question. What is the difference in the external audit firm and a forensic audit? We talked about the external audit firm that comes in at year end. With regards to the forensic audit, it's a detailed review of financial records to uncover illegal activity. A forensic audit is sometimes used when there is an allegation of wrongdoing such as fraud or kickbacks. A forensic audit may produce evidence that may be used in court to support legal activities. So I hope I answered the question that was put forth to me on that one. Be mindful, just as information, that the external audit firm probably should not be the same firm that does a forensic audit. That's for any entity, not just the school district. Next question. Why does internal audit sometimes use or issue audit advisories instead of an actual audit report? With regards to advisories, whenever there's an observation made based on a previous audit or something that you may hear in the public domain or something that you may hear in a committee meeting, the auditor may identify a potential risk that needs to be addressed. So what is done in that situation is you put forth an inquiry to the related department or function, asking them if they can do a self-assessment to address the potential risk that was identified through that process. And when that is put forth to the internal auditor, what you may have as a byproduct of that is an advisory that goes back to that department or function. It's not an audit report. It's not something that goes back goes forward to the board. It's an advisory solely for that department, that's that line manager, and maybe even upward to a middle manager, but it does not get distributed to the board. That's an advisory. An opportunity for that department to be proactive in establishing a process to mitigate that risk that was identified in lieu of a potential future audit. That's an advisory. An actual audit report is where the results of an audit, this is a formal audit that's initiated based on the annual audit plan or by a special request from the board or the administration. In that instance, a draft report that reflects the results of the audit is issued to the department, and that gives the department an opportunity to suggest any changes, if you will, something that may not have been properly identified in the audit process. So again, at that point, it's a draft. Now that draft will outline the criteria or the basis for the audit. It will also speak to the conditions that were noted. And we use the word conditions. Typically some will say findings. I don't use findings because it has a negative connotation to it. I want to keep the audits positive. It's not a got you situation. It's to help identify issues and put forth opportunities to improve. As a matter of fact, I don't use recommendations, so you won't see recommendations in the report either. You will see opportunities to improve. It has a positive connotation to it. Now, once management gets the draft, they put forth the action plan to address the opportunities to improve. And by the way, management has 15 days business days, by the way, to address those concerns. Once those come back to internal audit, they're embedded into the report and finalized as a final report, and that's what gets distributed to the board and senior administration. The final question was then, does internal audit do program audits? I didn't have an opportunity to get clarity on that question, but I would surmise that the question is regarding, again, I look at the organization chart, and you have the left side, which is primarily academics, and the right side. If you look at the database G, you see that 98% of the audits are related to programs, departments, functions, activities, et cetera, on the right side of the chart. In 16 years, I have done 3 what you may call program audits, i.e. the left side. And those, we won't mention those, but those are all in years past, nothing recently. I don't typically audit academic programs, but we'll only do so at the request of the board or the superintendent. And that is the final item. Hope I didn't take too much time. I'm not going to cover the exhibits, but I'll pause for any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Washington. Does any commissioners have any questions? Commissioner Weston?
I remember that last board meeting, I think it was, that I asked that the hotline that we have be returned to the auditor and have the auditor then disperse it to the various departments so that we will have a fraud and waste hotline that was started, I think you said, in 2015. And has that come to fruition?
I can answer that. That is in the process of being transferred. And I'll make sure the board knows once that's happened.
Okay. The other item that you spoke about, to go back through my notes, forgive me. You said that the most important element is the control environment, where we must have leadership across all lines that believe in the importance of the operational side and of the organizational chart, and the internal controls necessary to ensure that those are working effectively. Do we have that?
That's a broad question, but I will say that in the 16 years, you can point to some challenges, if you will, that any school district, any organization would have in having those elements in place. Those elements being that control framework with emphasis on that overall element of control environment. It's very difficult. It's not something that's tangible, if you will. But again, that's a challenge for any organization.
The external auditors, we have our own auditors here. We have a company that also checks on those audits. And it's quite expensive to audit, then have someone check on the audits. And so I appreciate the fact that what we're doing, the function, is to always try to be proactive rather than reactive to what is being audited. And so I would appreciate it if someone could, I don't know if it's the superintendent, talk about I know we always get a clean audit and that the auditors are presented with awards. But not only is it done that way, please tell our listeners about the company that has to come in and then review that audit. We pay a company to come in and take a look at those?
No, we
Or
don't.
explain, okay.
The external auditor comes in and works their process. The external auditors, and Ms. Matthews Hazel, correct me if I'm wrong, they're approved through the state and do our audits. And just like internal auditor Washington has a set of standards and procedures that he follows, auditors have a set of standards and procedures that they follow. And that's a part of what they do, and that's incorporated in the CAFR, that information about the auditor, information about the process, and all that is contained in that document. And it's on our website and it has been for years and years, for anybody to go and look at and review.
Yes, just additional clarity. The CAFRA review is by statute. We're required by state to have that. Every district is required by state to have a CAFRA review.
Okay, thank you.
You say Kappa?
CAFR,
Continuous comprehensive
annual
financial
comprehensive annual financial report.
report.
Yeah,
The CAFRA is compiled by finance and is audited by the external auditor.
right.
Okay, that's what I needed to clarify. Thank you.
Commissioner Hersey?
Two questions, Mr. Washington. What is the process for follow-up once a recommendation is made? If you've gone out and done something, what is the process for follow-up to ensure that your recommendations are being considered or actually implemented?
That's a good question. As I stated, the timeline for an audit report, it goes out in draft first.
Right, 15 days.
So I don't want to use the term auditee, the management of that particular department or function that was reviewed gets a draft. There is 7 to 10 business days after we've had the closing conference, by the way, to still address any concerns that they may have regarding the contents of the audit. There may have been something that was misconstrued or interpretation of a particular procedure. And then after that, they still have the 15 days that I mentioned before to provide responses and a specific action plan to address those opportunities to improve, i.e. recommendations. Typically, there's no issue with that. I will say that in the past, prior administration, not current one, there was some timeliness issues in getting those back. That's not a concern right now. The one good thing is if there was some concerns with the timely response, there was a conduit in place to help facilitate that process. That conduit was the audit committee. You will route those concerns through that committee. But like I said, we don't have those issues currently.
So we don't have them currently because you haven't done any, or is it because there's been follow-up? I'm just asking for
Okay.
clarification. What was the change that you don't have it now? Are those persons who, the audits that you've done, those managers went ahead and made the right changes or implemented the changes that you recommended?
I'll take that one too. As Mr. Washington said, one of the things, and we focus on processes and procedures in every department that we have. And it is, and I think he also referenced expectations and administrative culture and climate and so forth. And there is one of an expectation of efficiency, effectiveness, regardless of the department and what they do. So this administration, and I get a copy of Kevin's report, but we've ensured, okay, follow up, do what's needs to be done. And I just want to piggyback a little bit on what Mr. Washington said, and staff has an opportunity to say, okay, yeah, we agree with this recommendation or item for improvement, and upon occasion, no, if there's some misunderstanding or something, well, no, it's really this. And that's why, you know, he goes back and in that final report takes that under consideration. So we make sure folks comply.
Okay.
Right, we just to address that a little further.
Sure.
We make every effort to not have anything that's not agreed upon in the final report. So during the field audit work, during the closing conference, during the draft process, those are opportunities to get full clarity on any concerns that are addressed, any findings that are put forth. So there's those opportunities each step of the process. So there's not going to be any situation where you have a final report that goes to senior administration and to the board that's going to have a non-response in it. We want to get full clarity on that before there's a final report that's distributed to everybody.
So I'm just trying to understand. So if you find a recommendation and say it's at particular school A, and you want the school to adjust that or make those changes, it would help the next school or the next setting. So that is what I'm asking.
Right.
What is the process for follow-up to address? That's what I'm asking.
In the case of a school audit, and the school audits are not based on are not risk-based, by the way. So it's not part of the assessment. Those are done on a cyclical basis. So I cycled through several high schools and sometimes the middle school, but primarily the high schools. Those are on a cycle basis, not based on any risk assessment that I've done. But you make a good point in that sometimes there's an issue brought forth at school A, and in lieu of trying to get all school audits done in one fiscal year, it would be in the district's best interest to be proactive and make certain that school B, C, D, E, and F are aware of those concerns as well. And that's where I think having the principal, the executive director, and other administrators to collaborate and make certain that, well, these issues were found at A, let's get ahead of the process and make sure that B, C, D, and F don't have the same issues.
Okay. And my last question, and I read somewhere, and I don't quite remember, you can do change orders up to 50,000. Is there a limit to the number of change orders that can be done without coming back before the board?
That's not within my purview, so I don't.
Oh, that's not, okay.
I mean, I know what the procedures are, but I don't.
And that's outlined in the procurement code,
Yeah.
Okay.
which is, again, is on our website.
Commissioner Bishop.
Thank you, Chair. Under Section 7, under the table of contents, internal control framework, is right up under the triangle. And I think it's the section called controlled environment. You were pretty adamant, or you emphasized the thought on nepotism and the competent staff who understands their responsibilities fully vet and minimize nepotism. I got a question, maybe even a discussion. One, the question is, as an internal auditor, how do you define nepotism, or how does this organization define nepotism?
Well, we have, nepotism is defined within board policy. I could read it verbatim. It's, generally speaking, I guess, hiring someone who's related and without consideration of other factors.
Yeah.
In a sense, generally speaking. But again, the board policy does address nepotism.
All right, and so it's not just competent staff understanding their responsibilities. They need to be clear about their relationship as well. Meaning, what does this district define as nepotism, right? The reason why I'm bringing that up, this is Columbia, South Carolina. Small city, everybody almost related. How do we prevent or control the internal controls of this relationship, of this organization, when you are in such an intimate or small town? Because at this point, if we are not clear about people's relationships, everybody can be your cousin who you hire.
Right.
Like in certain small towns, literally the whole town works for the school, because the school is the biggest entity, biggest employer of the area, and I think we are number 4 in this area. So I wanted to make sure that was some type of discussion, because my question now is, what is the responsibility of leaders who are competent in vetting those potential employees? What is their responsibility into reporting their relationship before they hire the person? What is that role?
Right.
And responsibility.
Right. So as I read the policy, I don't see where it says you can't hire your cousin. I think the question is whether or not you fully vet that person and make certain that they have the prerequisites to do that function, to perform that function. So you're right. In some areas, everybody's your cousin. But again, the policy speaks to how you go about fully vetting that candidate for the position that they are applying for.
And then last thing, Chair, and just making sure we're practicing transparency to tell people this is a relationship of knowing this person before I even hire them, or before I even recommend them, is part of the framework that we need, right?
Well, yeah, I think the more important thing to do is make certain that they can do the job, because potentially there will be some adverse impact on others within that same department. For instance, you have a department that has a staff of 6, 7, and they, for whatever reason, believe that that person was hired only because of a relationship, as opposed to them having the requisite, knowledge, skills, and abilities. You're going to have potentially some issues within that department. But again, the focus is for HR and the hiring official to fully vet that person, and if they can do the job, that's what you're supposed to hire.
Yeah. Did you have something to add?
Are you?
I'm done, Chair.
Would you? All right. Commissioner Clyburn? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were raising your hand.
I was. But I just want to make sure he didn't have something to add.
Dr. Kumis?
Did you want to add anything, Dr. Kumis?
The only thing that I can add to that is there is a place on the application, first of all, are you related to anyone in the district? The other piece is we have a form that is filled out by our employees that if they are related to someone, they send it in, it's signed off by myself, and it goes to the superintendent as well in reference to the nepotism.
That's the answer I'm looking for. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Kumis. Commissioner Wesson?
My question was this, for Exhibit B, the audit committee, and the audit committee has not been established or worked on since 2015. Do we have an audit committee is, I guess, my question. I know we have a charter or audit committee charter from May 2013. Is it functioning?
If you'll let me kind of jump in, because that is relevant to the one comment, and I think this is not for us to decide today. This is an information item, but I think Mr. Washington brought up a good point. There used to be an audit committee. It was disbanded, and I think the reason at the time was folks thought that maybe the entire board could just perform the role that that audit committee had been performing. I think Mr. Washington brings up a good point. We need to decide whether we want to revert back to an audit committee or not, and if not, we need to clean up the language in the policies just to make sure they're consistent, and then if we do decide we want to reestablish a separate audit committee, that we do that in policy. So I think that is something that the board is going to, that we're going to need to have a discussion about and come to some decision about. We don't have to have that, we don't have to decide that today, but I think Mr. Washington's point is well taken.
Okay. And the other thing that the information that comes out of the internal auditor's report domain, because sometimes before I was even on the board, I got information from people who FOIA'd it, and once I got on the board, I still had to get information from things that were FOIA'd because they weren't presented. And so given the fact that if we could get reports so that we won't have to FOIA things or to know, for example, there was the tip on the hotline that something had happened, had transpired, and it may have been Medicaid not being reimbursed or something of that nature. To find out from other people and not being given that information prior to is an issue. So I would love it if we were to get information before someone has to FOIA it and share it with us.
Okay, so just for point of clarification, I didn't want to speak to any particular audit activity, but since it's already been mentioned, it's out in the public domain. Now, let me just provide some clarity on that. That was, in fact, a tip, yes, full transparency. It was looked into, and the decision was made to not initiate an audit, but to help those departments through self-assessment. So what I did was facilitated a self-assessment, and having them produce that and reviewing what they put forth, I thought that what the action plan that we're putting forth was sufficient to address the concerns to make certain that those situations would not occur again going forward. And so the end result of that was an advisory, as I spoke to earlier. That advisory was not, as you just mentioned, was not disseminated or distributed to the board. However, in my quarterly internal audit updates, I did provide a summary of that particular project and spoke to how and why it was investigated, if you will, and the fact that it was an advisory that was not distributed in full detail to the board.
It's getting back to what someone said earlier. Once you see it, if you share it with, well, I think it was your A, B, and C,
Right.
then someone can learn from that particular information.
Okay.
So if we're going to look at, this might have been done here, if it's shared with another department or whatever, it could also stop them from stepping in the same environment that happened in. The other question that I have is about MOAs. Are they run through your office or who? I'm talking about PTA, all of those organizations. How are they cleared?
You want me to address that? I can
Address
tell you,
that?
they're not run through my office.
Okay, that's
Right,
okay.
yeah, it's not an
All
internal
right.
Not an
audit.
internal audit process.
It's not an internal. Okay, thank you.
All right, Commissioner Clyburn.
Thank you. So my question, Commissioner Bishop, his last comment went towards my concern about nepotism. And it's, I think is an HR question, that you mentioned the application process and, you know, that whole thing about the question being on there, you know, if you have a relative in the district, that is up to the applicant to disclose that information. And you also mentioned a backup form that it goes along with that, but also the hiring person. You know, what I guess, obligation or, if they don't disclose that this person that I've been to family reunions with, I know this person is my family, is there any kind of repercussion if it's found out and if it causes an issue on the campus or in a building? That's my first part of my question. So I do have a follow-up question. Is there repercussion, with that if it's found out?
Yes, ma'am, there could be repercussions from that. First of all, if they lie on their application and they don't divulge that they are kin to someone, that's filing a false application.
Correct.
And the second thing is if it does cause an issue in one of our departments, then they did not divulge that information, then yes, ma'am, there could be repercussions from it.
Okay. And some organizations have a policy or a practice, may not be a policy, but have a practice that, two related individuals can I don't mind hearing my voice again, but it's a little distracting. But I don't know where that's coming from. But okay, I don't hear it anymore. Anyway, so there may not be anything against two relatives working in the same organization, but some organizations have a practice or policy that they not work in the same building or not work in the same, one relative doesn't report directly to that person. So would that be, that have been a remedy, for said situation as well?
Yes, ma'am, it could be a remedy for any type of future things that could happen. It absolutely could.
Okay. I think I'm
Good.
done.
Just, all right,
I just have one other question.
Mr. Washington.
Yeah, just a couple things on your question specifically. What I presented was a situation where you want to minimize the risk. It doesn't mean that I've noticed through audits that those things have manifested and have gone towards a report. I'm just presenting information regarding how we address the risk involved in not fully vetting individuals. And if you look at the industry as a whole, when you try to establish a root cause of a condition or finding, sometimes if you go through the trail, you will find that some of the things could have been addressed by, again, hiring the right person for that position. Generically speaking, I wasn't speaking to any audit that I've conducted, yes. The second thing, if I may, again, I didn't want to speak to any particular audit activity, but with regards to that question you had about the Medicaid, that I'm not sure, I don't know how that got FOIA, but it got into the public domain because it was in fact FOIA. I will, I'm not going to break FOIA laws. So if it got FOIA, I don't know how or why, because it was not a report. It was an advisory. I've explained the difference between reports and advisories. If you look at every report that I produce, you'll see the footnote that talks about it being confidential and proprietary information to the board and the school district. But even with that being the case, if it's FOIA, it has to be provided. An advisory is not issued to the board. If it's something that's most egregious that I think the board needs to have an awareness of, it will be, yes. But I'm in that situation, we're trying to help that department to continuously improve and address any risks of not meeting objectives, and there was no need for the board to have that advisory, almost said report. So it got into the public, but once I did recognize that it was out there and the board might have been receiving questions about it, I thought it was important that the board also have a copy of that advisory.
Thank you, Mr. Washington. I appreciate the presentation. It was in-depth, and you answered the questions very well. Obviously, we will continue this discussion. I'm sure more questions will come up as we go along, but I think we need to turn next to the next topic. 6.02, board processes. So I think this probably deserves some explanation. Dr. Witherspoon might want to help a little bit. I think some board members have asked for a discussion about how the board operates and some processes. We've got 2 new board members, and I think it's probably a good time for us to brainstorm and talk about things that we may want to make sure we're reinforcing or change or whatever. But if Dr. Witherspoon, if you want to provide a little more context for that agenda item.
Thank you, Chairman Lominack. In consultation with the chair, just some discussion on, and certainly we appreciate board's questions and feedback on any and every item, but some protocols. I know some of this will be covered at the new board member training with SCSBA in about a week or so. But just some discussion that, and I know you all get emails and things. Sometimes they copy me. Most times now they don't. You all will, some of you will forward it to me and say, hey, Mr. Superintendent, can you get somebody to reply or investigate this or what have you, which, again, we have no problem doing, and follow up on said items. And as a general practice, you know, I will either through board update or depending on what the situation is, I try to communicate with you all on Fridays. So you don't necessarily have to check email all during the week, but put some follow-up in Friday update. FYI, you know, said issue has been addressed or we've made contact, and sometimes it's giving you all some more context about said situation. But as again, discussion I've had with the chair, and also, you know, some of you all forward those things to me. I cascade them, and when I reply to someone, I do not copy you all on those, because then that can turn into a meeting. And then it also could turn into something that you all sit in a certainly a governance role, but also a judiciary role at some point, whether it's student matters, whether it's personnel matters. And if you all get involved, and it's okay to listen, we understand constituent services, that role that you all have to play, we all, self-included, respect that tremendously. But if you get too involved in it, then that's going to call for a recusal if the board has to take action, and later on. Again, if you have, and then I would also ask, you know, send it to me. Don't go deep in the organization, principals and others, to say, hey, I got this email, tell me about it. You know, the administration will handle that, and what I talk to the team about, EDs included, we talk about reciprocal responsibility. You all give it to me. I will make sure it gets handled. And my job is to get back with you and say, okay, that's been handled, or we've done what we can. And again, even whether it's a personnel matter, a student matter, or other matter, there's but so much I can give you as well, because if it, again, comes to you all as a judiciary matter, I can't, not prejudice, but give you too much. And y'all know, and a lot of you here have had either personnel hearings or student matters, and the way that works is, you know, the student or the staff will present their case, the administration will present their case, and then you all rule. So I can't give you but so much information either, because I don't want to prejudice you all either on what happened. So I would just ask, you know, if you got something, send it to me. We'll handle it. Because, you know, my job is to make sure you guys are good. So if you get something, send it to me. We will, we cascade it. Same with chat with the chair. We get those, and we talk about those EDs, and whether it's student nutrition or what have you, we talk about those in our staff meeting, and those things get addressed as well. And I will say this, as I say all the time, if anytime you guys have a question or comment, something you want to ask, call me or come by. call Dana and say, hey, does he have some time on whatever date and time? Oh, we'll make time. So let me know. Again, my job is to make sure you guys are good and that you're fulfilling your constituent services role as well as we go through. Mr. Chair, any questions or comments?
Yeah, and I just want to piggyback. I think one of the things that I think going forward we could improve on is having some kind of onboarding, a more concrete onboarding process for new members. I would have benefited from it, I think, both in writing and meeting. I think this discussion is good. I think it's good for the public to hear. I totally agree. I think the most natural inclination for any newly elected board member when they get an email from a parent about a concern at a school is to want to ask questions of the school to answer the parent, and that's normal. It's not helpful, and once you step back, you can realize why. You don't want a principal getting 3 different emails from 3 different board members and people going off in different directions. Principals have, as it turns out, enough on their plates, or teachers do. So I think once people hear that, it makes total sense, but the first inclination is just to try to help. And so I see how that happens. I think we as a board and as an organization could probably do a little bit more before folks go to the conference in February, which is 4 months after people have been working and doing these things. And speaking on behalf of myself, I made some mistakes the first couple of board meetings that then Chairman Bishop had to kind of pull me aside on. It was ignorance, which I have plenty of and did then as well. And so, I think I will work with this board before the next election to make sure that we've got both a written document, but also some sort of kind of set meetings or things that have to happen either as a board or within the board or committees or something to kind of onboard people, make sure they feel comfortable. And these questions are asked and understood before they get rolling. Okay? Commissioner Clyburn and then Hersey.
So you just mentioned the, I guess the training or it's yes, coming up in at the end of this month. But we had an election, November, December, and in January. There have been multiple conferences, sessions that have been had. I can think of 3 right now that I actually attended. And during these, that's why I think I've benefited. I know other board members have benefited, and we continue to stress the importance of attending trainings and conferences because of the wealth of knowledge that they present. And a lot of those sessions cover board trainings, board conduct, how you should respond to principals when they come to you for things, teachers when they come to you for things, parents and students. And I've sat in those sessions, so we don't have to wait to a new board member orientation to hear this vital information that is necessary on how you should be conducting yourself so you don't, break out of policy. But I just wanted to definitely make those things clear. It's free, we tell Dana all the time, I want to sign up for this, I want to sign up for that. We need to take advantage of, what these organizations bring to the table, for us to benefit from. So we don't have to wait to new board member orientation to do that. So I just wanted to comment on that.
Commissioner Hersey.
Just 2 things. I've already started a skeleton of a document for new board members. And so what I think we're speaking of, Commissioner Clyburn, is not so much conferences and professional development, but procedural things or onboarding. Just as a new teacher comes into a district, there's a plan for onboarding. And so we're speaking more in terms of that and not PD or a conference or sitting in a workshop. And another reason why I've chosen not to go to the last 2 conferences is just being fiscally responsible. Some things are not necessarily geared towards board members. And so, the end of this month, that one is specifically for board members, but say SCASP wasn't specifically for board members. And so I chose not to attend that one. My other question was, has any consideration been given as it relates to communicating to us when things happen at the schools. I'm not sure if Karen's office has ever thought about doing a simple Google or Microsoft Teams form so the schools know exactly what to enter, so you get the same information from every school. And I'm thinking back as a principal how that would have saved time and being more consistent with information that we present to you, because those emails go out to everybody. Just a thought, just something that I thought about with helping things to be a little more consistent and precise.
And the board gets those alerts that, and again, I know you all have other things to do. Now, certain things, I will text you all and say, hey, heads up, and you don't know now what's going to be newsworthy, but if it's something I think that might hit the news and not have you all caught off guard, I'll send you a text, say, FYI, this is going on or this has happened. And I do know we have a process that works through Karen's shop, whether it's safety and security or at the schools. The information that we know at the time is sent out, that we know at the time. And oftentimes, if you look at, crisis communication and the like, sometimes the first thing that's put out is not the correct thing, because you need more information and, oops, it wasn't this, it was that and all. So we do send those out through communications. You all are included in that. And like I said, I try to give you all a heads up. But depending on what the situation is, it might be, okay, the student's being transported, and that's all we know. And then they may follow up to say, okay, child's okay, this, that, and the other. And we do, like anything else, we do kind of monitor and, okay, is there something we can do to get better? Sure. But we do try to keep you all informed, and we do have some, just not to go down a safety rabbit hole now, but I know safety and security, they've got, and schools, they've got some procedures that they need to do. And our schools have a process. They call their EDs. The EDs will go over and help manage, and the first order of business, depending on what it is, if it's a big brouhaha at a school or whatever, is to get control of the situation. And so we know what we know at the time, and then we do some
So let me
follow-up.
clarify.
Sure.
What I'm asking is, when I was under Dr. Prince's supervision, if something happened or we need to return a call, we had a form, name, age, address, what happened, and how did you respond? That's what I'm asking for when Karen's office sends us those narratives about. I'm just thinking about the person having to type all of that in. If there was a simple form to fill out, it would be more consistent. The principal
look at
called
it.
and said this person, just a form to fill out that's simple, that the principals would have to get the information, and then whatever you need to extract for us would be sent to us. That's all I was asking. I'm not saying what you're not sharing. I'm just saying a more simplified process for it being communicated to everyone.
Because sometimes it's an ED that's calling, because again, the principal may be on the ambulance
Okay.
or the AP going to the hospital with the child. So principal can't fill out the form.
Okay.
So it may be an ED talking with an assistant principal or SRO or office assistant or what have you to get information. But your point is made. Your point is taken.
Commissioner Bishop?
Thank you, Chair. Just want to add to the conversation that was maybe discussed or thought before regarding board processes. Chair, I'm not sure why this was added to the work session agenda, but I do believe it's because of transparency. We want people to be aware of how we work internally. So I do value that. I appreciate it. But I don't want anyone to be ignorant or miss the fact that what we discussed transparently in front of everybody has already been discussed years after years after years of how we work. So this is not a new conversation. We've had it during board report. We've heard the superintendent request, if there's something you need me to be aware of, call me, set a meeting up. So maybe it's just a reminder to this board, but more so a reminder that this has already been discussed. It's nothing new. So I want to be clear about that. And also, I want to speak to the value the value that is added when our board definitely goes to get the training, but also maybe even the value of some of the senior leadership of this board sharing with other board members about things that could be best practices. I acknowledge my colleague's comment, and it's not a back and forth, okay? I'm just adding to the conversation about physical responsibility. I support it. I support us being physical responsible, but it sometimes costs what it costs, okay? And when this board takes the opportunity to get the type of training that can be provided from associations or organizations that speak to the blind spots, the pain points, it's an investment. It's a great opportunity for us to learn from those organizations. And what I will tell you that we should subscribe to or support is that we're not the ones that should be the professionals of this desire to get development of a training manual. South Carolina School Board Association, let them do it. And that won't be outside of physical responsibility. That would be a clear investment of what we need. So when we start looking at what needs to be done, that is a written manual, something that we have internal as a training module, I don't think it should be owned by us into developing that. Bring in that organization that we have worked with for those trainings, for the Board Member Institute. Let them hear from us about things we didn't know when we came in the door and things we know that now we inside the door to create that manual. Bring them in and let them create that. It shouldn't be what we try to do. Let's bring in an external perspective to help us see what all of us need to see. And that is something I would support. So when we're talking about investing in this board, I think our budget is less than 1%. Less than 1%? Less than what's that?
Less than 1% of 1%.
Less than 1% of 1% of this total operation. And we lead the organization from actions that require us to be aware of our responsibility. So I enjoy going to the conference because I come back equipped with information to help my colleagues, this organization, my community, keep Richland One number one. So I wanted to add to that conversation, and hopefully it's accepted as value. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bishop. All right, Commissioner Weston, and then Commissioner Clyburn.
I appreciate the fact that you're talking about onboarding for new board members. And I noted that I'd given some suggestions when I came on board, and I didn't know until this new board came on board that some of those suggestions were taken. Because I had to go and get a TB test and couldn't find a place to go and get it. So I already shared with them, then you need to go to the one down near University of South Carolina. But now it's been dropped from that because I had asked for a checklist of things that could go for new board members and given some suggestions. And so I saw that it had been done. I didn't know it, but it had been done. Coming to anything new is an adjustment. It's a learning procedure. I think I responded to Ms. York at one point to say thank you for sending out those alerts because I was getting phone calls about it, not knowing anything about it, but I could look to say, well, it's being handled. They are very much aware of it. What came close to heart was when the shooter was near Bradley, and the school didn't know the internal part of that there was someone with a gun that was in the premises or whatever, and that our students and faculties were concerned that it was ICE coming in and that kind of thing. And even having Dr. Witherspoon mention the fact that we are going to definitely be proactive and tell them the policies and the procedures is important for us to hear and for the community to hear and adjust to. So going onboarding and learning how to even use technology when I'm not an Apple person kind of thing, it's a learning curve. And so we all have to adjust to those kinds of things. So thank you for that.
Dr. Witherspoon.
Mr. Chair, just for a point of clarification, we did not have a shooter in the school.
Not in the school.
No, there was something
Parked in
not
the
on the
parking
premises.
lot. Thank you.
So
But
I
the
just
school
wanna-
was on lockdown, so
Yeah,
that's
they
what
have
assumed
standard
that-
operating procedures
Yes.
and the like, but I just wanted
Yeah.
to clarify that.
Thank you.
But point taken.
Commissioner Clyburn.
Yes. So I just wanted to put it out there for support. My colleague mentioned a few minutes ago about SBA possibly assisting us with that, and we can request, that that from them. I'm in an opinion of, it may not need to be a board-led type of effort. SBA is a state organization that lends support across the state for school boards in and around our district. And I think they're coming to the table and assisting us with that and leading us through that process. If we were to do that, to create an onboarding process, I think it's a responsible thing to do. A lot of times, we think we know a whole bunch of what we don't know. And, to have a state-run organization to assist us with that process, I think that's responsible. And to me, I would support that as well. I just wanted to put my voice in there for that.
Thank you, Commissioner Clyburn. All right, with that, I think we'll move. We've got about 15 or 16 more minutes, and we'll move to the final topic, which is 6.03, teacher and staff retention and recruitment. I put that on there. It maybe could have been a better title, but it was really to start having a discussion as we're quickly moving into contract season. And believe me, I know retention and recruitment efforts have been going on long before the contracts go out. But from the board's perspective, we're heading into that season, and we're heading into the budget season. And I wanted to talk about, and at least us having a little bit of a brainstorm about things that the board might need to think about, that we're hearing from teachers and staff and principals. For example, there's state legislation that, whether it's going to pass, who knows, but that would require districts to include in the contract a minimum guaranteed salary before contracts go out when contracts go out in April. Do we need to be thinking about that, whether or not it's mandated by the state? Does the board need to think about a discussion about whether teachers and staff could complete surveys in the middle of the school year, so that we can get a sense of how things are going before we find out a bunch of teachers are leaving a school, or when we know a bunch of people aren't going to be leaving because they're so happy at the school. I know some principals do conduct surveys for their own internal uses because it's helpful to them in the report card, but could we benefit as a district by having a kind of systematic way of gauging how teachers and staff are feeling midway through the year? Also, I'm getting consistent concerns about class sizes. Obviously, I know we've got around 40 to 50 vacancies at any one time, but we also cut quite a number of teaching positions. I think we're really going to have to work to get those back so that we can get the class sizes back down. And also, teachers not knowing necessarily what grade this is, especially true of elementary school teachers. I hear this a lot, not knowing what grade they're going to teach sometimes or quite often. That's really hard. I realize with the vacancies and the lost FTEs, it's even harder for principals to prepare, especially in April. But I think it's something that if there are ways we can get creative or think through some of these things and acknowledge some of the challenges that the teachers have been expressing and staff members. I mean, that's just to name a few, obviously. And then I will say, principals will say to me, boy, you talk about teachers and their frustrations a lot, but have you heard about mine? And I've told them over and over that it's so nice to have Commissioners Hersey and Moore here who will help me with my blind spots when it comes to principals. But what I have heard from a number of principals is, I've got a full team and I didn't get to choose any of them, right? And so, again, that goes towards supply and demand and having the luxury of us, having enough people that a principal can kind of choose their team. But I think it's something that the board needs to be, these are the types of things the board needs to be aware of. Now, we can't necessarily address all of these, but some of these we could. For example, I asked that we read exit interviews before, redacted, of course, but read exit interviews so that we can get a sense as a board how things are feeling at the school level and make sure that we're connected to the things that these folks are concerned about. So I throw those out there for discussion. Others may have other ideas. We're not going to solve these tonight, but I think this is a starting point so that we can start to kind of winnow down which of these things and other things the board thinks is in its lane to kind of work on and which are not. And I'll turn it over to anybody who's got any questions or comments after that monologue. Any other?
The only thing
Commissioner
I'm sorry.
Hersey?
Yes, class coverage is going to always be an issue. Are teachers being compensated if they're working during their planning periods? And is there a limit to how many times someone is being pulled to cover a class? Because a teacher texted, this week saying that they were just exhausted. They're not able to get anything done because they're consistently covering classes for people that are being out. And it's just unfair that she wanted to quit. And I said, no, you can make it. At least try to make it to the rest of the year. But that's just something that we may need to look at. And you can't, I guess that goes back to morale and why people are taking so many days off work. And here again, looking at if improvement plans are in place for those persons that have exceeded the number of days in which, whatever quota is being set. So other than that, I'm sure there's more, but that was just one of the things that I had on my list was teachers concerned about coverage, doing so much coverage.
Commissioner Moore?
I think also one of the things that I hear a lot about and that I experienced myself was the whole concept of having the time to absorb new initiatives and having the time to discuss plans before they come back in fall. Right before they come back in the fall. There's just a few days. And not only are they trying to get rooms ready, but they're also trying to learn all the new stuff that's going on. Nothing wrong with those things. I'm just saying we need to try to figure out a way, because sometimes it's mandated stuff. We don't have any choice. But I think we need to try and be cognizant of the fact that whatever requirements are being placed on us from outside, we need to help our teachers understand that we truly support them in giving them the amount of time they need to collaborate and they need to plan. I mean, we talk about having improvement plans for schools, and, a perfect example that comes to mind is we just recently approved the plans for those schools that needed improvement, and, that whole system is set up almost, it's an impossible situation. You come in there and say, all right, take last year's stuff and have a 30-day review and a 60-day review and a 90-day review, and we don't even approve the plans before 60 days have gone, 90 days have gone by. So we're looking, at plans that people have worked very hard on and that they want to do, but they're things they better have already been doing when school started if we can get the information we need. There's just some way we need to realistically support them in pulling all that together. And that is not a new issue. It has been around forever. I had the same experience when I was a principal. But we also need to acknowledge, though, that as we move towards more and more towards educating individual children with what each child needs, then we've got to look at making that possible and giving people time to get that done. And I don't know what the answer for that is, but, we just need to get creative about how we can help teachers with that frustration and principals, because then the teachers' plans then come out of the school plans, which come out of the district plans, and or actually it should be the other way around, in my opinion. But, the school plans should come from the teacher plans and the district plans should come from the school plans, but we got to figure out how to get that done. and minimize the frustration with it.
Thank you, Commissioner Moore. Commissioner Hersey?
Quick question. Is there a process in place from HR for employees, teachers, assistant principals, if they want to meet with someone in human resources? And a turnaround time for those meetings? Or do you have a window of time open to where if someone wants to come in and meet with human resources, they can?
Folks in human resources, if they want to meet with them.
So just do
There's
direct email?
coordinators. Yes, ma'am. They can actually request. I even meet with teachers all the time. So if they want to meet with myself, I have 2 directors, in the department. We have coordinators in the department. Depends on, I guess, what they need to meet in reference to. But they can absolutely call the Human Resource Department, and we can set a meeting up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hersey. I think in closing, unless anybody else has any other questions, I do think that this board, I think all school boards have talked about the teacher and staff shortage generally. Everybody has. And there are 1,000 different causes of the shortage. And many of those causes are far outside the purview of a school board, but not all of them. And I think that we could take ownership and really set the district apart by maybe acknowledging some of the paper cuts that we may be able to fix. And I think I've mentioned contractual issues, and I'm happy to say this is, I think, the 2nd or 3rd year that we've not revoked or sought to revoke the teaching certificate of a teacher who resigned in the middle of the year. But I think we may want to look at our contracts with teachers and what we provide to them, and maybe, might be a leader in the state and not wait for the legislature to mandate something on us. So those are policy changes,
Yes.
and I realize we are a policy organization, so some of the things I think it's important for us to talk about and recognize, but we may not be able to fix with policy. There are decisions that we make, especially in the spring and summer, that I think more information for the board would be helpful. For example, when we're moving assistant principals and principals around, that's when I think things like information from teacher and staff surveys would be really helpful for the board as we make these, give our stamp of approvals on transfers. Not that goes towards a policy, but it would help us be, I think, more educated in our votes. And so I think there are 2 different things. One is information for us, and one is kind of policy making. And so I'll stop there. Commissioner Bishop.
Man, you're opening up a great conversation. I know we don't have time for it. But Chair, I think you're right in the vein of what we can do, right? Because you're speaking towards policy, but also it takes visionary leadership from this board to see a culture in our district and in our state, or just the state of education, that is leaning towards hyper accountability. And that hyper accountability puts pressure all through the system, where you feel the staff and the teachers feeling a certain type of way, our leaders feeling a certain type of way because of the hyper accountability. And so, yeah, you can't policy your way through it, but maybe we need to think about climate, even how we lead, looking at what we can do to support from top down with the superintendent, even the superintendent leading from bottom up, that when this district starts to function in a vertical and horizontal way, it does lead to a competitive environment. And what I mean by that, within this district, we put leaders in positions to grow the school or grow the district or grow the students, right? Because student outcomes is what we're here for. Although we are trying to put now in this climate a stronger emphasis on teacher appreciation, teacher support, and teacher emphasis towards contracts or whatever we can to do with retention and talent acquisition. At the end of the day, what we need is for them to understand the competitive nature of education. Now, I don't know about you all, but I wasn't the best student, right? Dr. Moore, I wasn't the best student, but I was a student. What we want is every student to be the best student they can be, because if they can believe in themselves that they are being competitive with their classmate, then our teachers can do the same thing. I want my students to be just as good as your students. The principals can say, I want my school to be just as good as your school. But we can't put so much pressure on everybody because of the culture of hyper accountability. So I close with this because my monologue was probably longer than the chair's was. Let's make sure that we don't policy our way through it, because I think that's what's going to bring hyper accountability. But let's look at shaping climate and culture.
Thank you. And on that note, without objection, we will stand adjourned with this work session. Thank you all.